Hey everybody, thanks for tuning into Otram's YouTube channel. Today we've got a 2011 Land Cruiser in that just needs front pads and rotors. So let me move the camera around so you can see what we're doing and we'll get started. So the first thing we need to do is get these retainer wires out. You can just grab them with a needle nose and pull them out of the pins, and then it just wiggles out of this hole in the middle. And then we can push these pins out. I'll do a little tappy, tappy, tappy with the hammer. There we go. When you're pulling this lower pin out, you just got to be aware that there's a spring right here. So don't lose that when you pull the, like I just did, when you pull the pin out, because it likes to fly. And with those pins out, we might be able to wiggle the pads out. And looks like that's not going to be the case today. So I'm going to take the caliper bolts loose instead from the back side here. And these are a 17 millimeter headed bolt. And they're usually pretty tight. Yeah, that one wasn't that bad. And you want to loosen both of them before you take one of them completely loose, because the caliper will want to pivot if you take one of them completely out first. And this one feels like it either has a lot of Loctite on it or is cross-threaded. Really hoping it's Loctite. Okay, good. It was a lot of Loctite. It is real common for these bolts to get cross-threaded when somebody puts them back in because they're fine thread and awkward to line up. And that is just not a good day because it ends up messing up the threads in the knuckle. Try to do this without blocking your view. There we go. And I'm going to grab a caliper hanger. Because you don't want the weight hanging on the brake rotor, or the brake line rather. And now we can pop our pads out. Come on. There we go. Just drop them on. And then while I've got the caliper flopped to the side, I'm going to go ahead and retract the pistons. And I've already checked the brake fluid reservoir up top to make sure I have room to retract these. If the brakes have been topped off recently, you won't always have room, and you'll go to retract these and fill the master back up and it overflows and makes a mess. And my retractor's not quite long enough to push that all the way back. So we're going to put one of these old pads back in as a spacer. There we go. And then those pads were kind of a bear to get out, and you can see where there's just rust and build up here where the pads ride. So I'm just going to take a wire brush and clean that up. being careful not to really hit the dust boots on the caliper pistons. And then same thing on the other side of the caliper. There we go. And then sometimes the rotors will just pop off. This one's being stubborn, but you can see there's 2 threaded holes here in the face. I'm gonna get 2 sacrificial 8mm bolts and we'll pop these off. There we go. And then there's a bit of corrosion on the hub surface back here. So we're going to clean that up because anything that's between this and the new rotor can cause wobble in the rotor, and you'll feel that as a brake pulse. And you can use just a wire brush for this. I've got one of these non-woven hub cleaners. And I'm just gonna take my wire brush and get in the spots that couldn't. And you want to be paying careful attention to the outside edge of the hub because that's where the rotor's going to center. And that's what was making the rotor stick when we went to take it off. So you want to make sure that's clean so that there's nothing hanging the rotor when we put it back on. And we'll just give that a rinse. Go ahead and rinse the backing plate out as well. Let me let that dry and then we'll come back and put the rotor on. Okay, so we're ready to put our rotor on. I've already wiped down the backside to make sure it's clean. So we're ready to put it on. And then first we're going to look and see where the marks were from the screws where we forced the rotor off. And we're going to line those up to the screw holes on the new rotor. That way, if it is slightly raised where we used the bolts to push these, it'll end up in that hole and not matter. And I'm just going to spin a lug nut on here just to hold this. And I'm going to get my 2 caliper bolts ready, and I'm going to put a little bit of red Loctite on them. Come on. And I'm going to flip my caliper back on here, making sure that I haven't twisted the brake hose while moving this around. Go ahead and start one bolt. And the other. And I'm going to use an electric ratchet just to speed up putting this back in. And this top one with all the Loctite residue on it. There we go. And then we're going to torque those to 73 foot-pounds. And I always like to hit these a couple of times just to make sure they're tight and seated, especially, since they're brakes and they're what make you stop. A little bit ahead of myself, it would have been easier to clean the rotor surface before I put the caliper on. No big deal. You can just wipe it. Why won't you spin? Only having one bolt holding that on was letting the rotor sit just crooked enough that I couldn't spin this to finish cleaning. So let's give that another go. And now we can take one of our pads, and you'll notice it's got a squealer built into it. And we're going to take one of the shims, line it up. And wiggle that in. And at least with the Toyota factory pads, there's only one squealer on each side. So when I do the inboard pad, I'm going to grab one of the pads that doesn't have a squealer. And I'm going to take a little Scotch-Brite and clean up these pins. And if your pins are grooved or really corroded, you'll want to get new ones as cheap insurance, because if these bind up, your pads will wear funny. And then when you're putting the lower one in, you've just got to squeeze this anti-rattle clip in between the two pads, and then it snaps into these holes and sits like that. And then we'll take our inside pin, and this is going to be real hard to do without getting in you guys' way. But you'll adjust it so that your holes are pointed to where they'll line up. And we'll take that one loose for a minute, put that in there, and then stick that in. And now our new pads are in. We'll just make sure that we can spin the rotor freely. And we're all set with bolting this up. So that was installing front pads and rotors on a 2011 Land Cruiser. All I've got to do now is, put the wheel on and torque it to 97 foot-pounds. But I'm doing shocks and some other work in here, so I'm not going to put the wheel on right now. Hope you guys found that useful, and if you did, please like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks.